Fortune had not bought the young heiress's soul. With a cold, calculating smile, the rich daughter tied tight ropes around her elderly, already injured mother's wrists and ankles, leaving her helpless on the metal tracks. Beside the old woman, the small family dog barked in despair, a faint sound against the distant whistle announcing the train's imminent arrival. The daughter, without a shred of remorse, turned her back, abandoning her mother and the dog to the mercy of a cruel fate. But from the shadows of the forest, a slender, powerful silhouette emerged, a panther with flaming eyes. It was no ordinary predator. It was a force of nature that sensed injustice. With surprising agility, the beast leaped onto the tracks and, with the precision of its sharp teeth, severed the ropes binding the elderly mother, freeing her seconds before the train roared past in a deafening rush. The danger to the old woman had passed, but the jungle's justice was only just beginning. The panther, now with a purpose, fixed its gaze on the cowardly daughter trying to flee. In a relentless pursuit, the beast imposed a silent terror until the young woman, in her desperation, tripped over her own feet on the tracks. The sound of sirens approached, and the guards, alerted by witnesses, found her there, fallen and paralyzed by fear, ready to be taken away. The blue and red glow of sirens tore through the night's darkness, painting the forest trees with ghostly colors. The young heiress, fallen on the tracks, felt the ground vibrate no longer with the threat of the train, but with the relentless approach of justice. Her eyes, once filled with icy contempt, now reflected pure, animalistic terror. The panther, which moments before had been the personification of her nightmare, had vanished as silently as it appeared, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her monstrosity. The heavy footsteps of the guards echoed on the gravel, and in seconds, firm hands lifted her from the cold ground. The touch was rough, devoid of the deference her family's name had always guaranteed her. She tried to speak, perhaps to protest, but the words were lost in a gasp. Reality hit her like the train she had hoped would hit her mother. She was no longer untouchable. She was a criminal, exposed, vulnerable. Cold handcuffs snapped shut on her wrists. A metallic sound that sealed her fate, a cruel contrast to the ropes she herself had tied. As she was led to the patrol car, her eyes swept the scene, searching for her mother's figure. The elderly woman, though injured and shaken, was being supported by other arriving officers and paramedics. The small dog, once a desperate bark, now nestled beside the old woman, licking her hands in a gesture of unwavering relief and loyalty. The scene was a distorted mirror of her own failure. The life she had tried to extinguish was now receiving care and compassion while she was dragged into darkness. The panther, however, had not completely disappeared. From a rocky outcrop hidden by the densest shadows of the forest, the beast watched. Its emerald eyes gleamed with silent satisfaction as the daughter was shoved into the back of the patrol car. There was no roar of triumph, only the majestic quietness of a guardian who had completed its task. Its rescue mission was over, but the jungle's vigilance was eternal. With a final look at the scene, the panther dissolved into the night, a specter of justice retreating, leaving behind only legend and fear. For the mother, relief was an acute pain, mixed with profound sadness. Her body ached, her wrists and ankles marked by the ropes, but her heart was even more wounded by the betrayal of her own flesh and blood. As paramedics assessed her injuries and covered her with a thermal blanket, she couldn't tear her gaze away from the patrol car taking her daughter. Silent tears streamed down her aged face, not just from physical pain, but from mourning for her child's lost soul. The dog, sensing its owner's anguish, whimpered softly, snuggling closer. In the patrol car, the young heiress's world crumbled. Luxury, power, impunity, all vanished. The city lights, once a symbol of her dominion, now seemed mocking, distant. She tried to rationalize. To blame her mother, the dog, fate, even the impossible panther, but the image of sharp teeth severing the ropes, the beast's penetrating gaze, the relentless pursuit, all repeated in her mind, an endless torture. How to explain the inexplicable, how to justify the unjustifiable. The officer beside her maintained a professional silence, but the contempt in his eyes was palpable. He had seen everything, but the cold cruelty of a daughter against her own mother was something that shocked even the most hardened. Questions would begin soon, accusations, public scrutiny. Her life, once a golden fairy tale, was about to turn into a media nightmare, a spectacle of depravity and ingratitude. The train, which had almost sealed the mother's fate, now passed over the tracks again, a thunderous reminder of the death she had orchestrated. But ironically, it was also a symbol of the life the panther had saved, and of the new life the daughter would now face. A life of a cell, of guilt, and perhaps of a terror that no fortune could buy or ward off. The jungle's justice had acted, and now the justice of men would take its course, but the panther's shadow would remain. A dark reminder that not all power resides in human hands. The rumble of the patrol car's engine swallowed the last echo of the train's whistle, carrying the young heiress away from the tracks and into a nightmare of her own making. The blue and red lights, once a distant spectacle, now danced over the guards' faces and the blurring trees. Inside the car, the silence was a torture, punctuated only by the rustle of the officer's uniform beside her and the muffled sound of the two-way radio. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt thin, heavy with the smell of metal and disgrace. Her mind, once a labyrinth of strategies and cold calculations, was now a battlefield. The image of the panther, with its emerald eyes and the impossible strength of its teeth, was etched onto her retina. How to explain that? How to justify the inexplicable? She, the untouchable, the daughter of fortune, was being taken away like a common criminal. The contempt in the officer's gaze was a mirror of her own soul, now exposed and bare. Every meter traveled was a farewell to the world she knew, a deeper dive into an abyss of consequences. The landscape changed. The darkness of the forest giving way to the raw, merciless lights of the city. Tall, cold buildings rose, indifferent to the drama unfolding inside that car. The luxury of her mansion, the parties, the opulent dinners, all seemed a distant mirage, a dream dissolving under the weight of the handcuffs on her wrists. She was a prisoner, not of bars, but of her own cruelty. Upon arriving at the police station, the shock was even greater. The environment was sterile, the smell of disinfectant and old paper replacing the aroma of flowers and money she was accustomed to. Heavy metal doors closed behind her with a dull thud, sealing her fate. Every step was accompanied by the curious and judging gaze of the few employees still working at that hour. There was no red carpet, no bows, just the cold efficiency of bureaucracy. Her name, once synonymous with power, was now just another entry on a form. Fingerprints, the camera flash for her mugshot. Each humiliation was a blow to her identity. She tried to maintain her composure, the mask of superiority, but inside, terror gnawed at her guts. The panther was not there, but its presence was felt in every beat of her heart, in every shadow dancing on the walls. It was the personification of the justice she had tried to subvert and which now reached her. Meanwhile, far away, in an emergency room, the elderly mother received first aid. Her wrists and ankles, marked by the ropes, burned, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the wound in her soul. The small dog, faithful and protective, did not leave her side for a moment, its warmth and affection being the only comfort amidst the storm. The words of the paramedics and doctors were a distant hum. Her mind was still on the tracks, on the train's imminence, on her daughter's betrayal, and on the panther. Ah, the panther, the image of the beast severing the ropes with its teeth, the wild strength and intelligence in its eyes. It was a miracle, a divine intervention that defied all logic. She knew no one would believe her, but it was the truth. And that truth, however unbelievable, was what kept her alive, what gave her a thread of hope amidst the desolation. She had not merely survived, she had been saved by a force that transcended human understanding. And that force demanded justice. Back at the police station, the young heiress was led to an interrogation room. A metal table, 2 chairs, a lamp hanging from the ceiling. The air was heavy, the silence oppressive. A detective entered, a middle-aged man with tired but penetrating eyes. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply sat down, opened a folder, and began to speak with a calm that was more terrifying than any fury. "Miss," he began, his voice monotone, "we have witnesses. We have your mother's testimony, and we have the crime scene. What do you have to say about this?" She tried to lie, tried to blame her mother, tried to distort the facts, but the words tangled in her throat. The image of the panther, the beast's gaze, the relentless pursuit, all mixed in her mind, making it impossible to construct a credible narrative. How could she, the daughter of fortune, explain that she had been thwarted by a wild animal that had acted with almost human intelligence? It would be ridiculous. It would be proof of her insanity. The detective watched her, impassive. He had seen everything, but the coldness of a crime like that still shocked him. He didn't believe in saving panthers, but he believed in evidence. And the evidence against the young heiress was overwhelming. The daughter's mask of control began to crumble. Cold sweat trickled down her forehead. The world she had built on lies and privilege was collapsing, brick by brick, under the relentless gaze of justice. The panther's shadow, invisible yet present, seemed to hover over the room, a constant reminder that the law of the jungle, sometimes, was more efficient than the law of men. The bare bulb on the interrogation room ceiling seemed mocking, its merciless glare revealing every line of tension on the young heiress's face. She tried to maintain her composure, the mask of coldness that had always protected her, but the cold sweat trickling down her temple betrayed her facade. The detective, with his monotone voice and tired yet incisive eyes, continued to weave the web of evidence, each word a knot tightening around her. "Miss, your mother was found tied to the tracks, the ropes. Well, they were severed in a peculiar way. And we have your fingerprints on them. We have witnesses who saw you nearby, and your mother's initial testimony, though somewhat fanciful in certain details, points directly to you." The word fanciful echoed in the daughter's mind. She knew what he was referring to, the panther. How could she, the daughter of fortune, explain that she had been thwarted by a wild animal that had acted with almost human intelligence? It would be ridiculous. It would be proof of her insanity. But the image of the beast, with its emerald eyes and the impossible strength of its teeth, was etched onto her retina, an endless torture. She tried to argue, "My mother, she's confused. She had an accident. I was there to help her, to rescue her." The detective raised an eyebrow, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. "Help her get hit by a train, with her hands and feet tied? That doesn't sound like a very conventional rescue method, miss." The daughter's voice faltered, words tangled in her throat. The narrative she had tried to construct of a concerned daughter and victim of circumstances crumbled under the weight of the truth and the panther's invisible presence. Each time she tried to deflect, the image of the beast emerged, a reminder that her cruelty had been confronted by a force she could not control or explain. The world she had built on lies and privilege was collapsing brick by brick under the relentless gaze of justice. "Ma'am, we need a more detailed statement about what happened. You mentioned a wild animal, a panther." The nurse's voice was gentle, but there was a note of skepticism. The mother closed her eyes, a solitary tear trickling down her temple. "I know what I saw. It was real. She saved me." She knew no one would believe her, but it was the truth. And that truth, however unbelievable, was what kept her alive, what gave her a thread of hope amidst the desolation. She had not merely survived, she had been saved by a force that transcended human understanding. And that force demanded justice. The decision to report her own daughter was a heavier burden than any physical pain. How could a mother condemn her own flesh and blood? But the image of the panther's eyes, the beast's sacrifice to protect her, the force of life fighting against death, all impelled her. The jungle's justice had acted, and now the justice of men should follow its course, for the sake of her own soul, and perhaps for her daughter's lost soul. Back at the police station, the young heiress felt the weight of defeat. The detective, seeing her resistance wane, changed tactics. He didn't need a full confession, just for her to stop denying the obvious. He placed photos on the table, the tracks, the severed ropes, the train's mark, and an aerial image of the area, showing the path she had tried to use to escape. "Miss, the truth, however harsh, is always the best path. Your mother is in the hospital. She is injured, but alive, and she is willing to testify." The mention of her mother being alive and willing to testify was the final blow. The daughter imagined the scandal, the headlines, her family's name dragged through the mud. Luxury, power, impunity, all vanished. The city lights, once a symbol of her dominion, now seemed mocking, distant. She tried to rationalize, to blame her mother, the dog, fate, even the impossible panther. But the image of sharp teeth severing the ropes, the beast's penetrating gaze, the relentless pursuit, all repeated in her mind. An endless torture. She lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. Tears, which she had sworn never to shed, began to roll, hot and bitter. They were not tears of regret, but of anger and frustration at being caught, at having failed in her perfect plan. The detective watched in silence, without a shred of compassion. He had seen everything, but the cold cruelty of a daughter against her own mother was something that shocked even the most hardened. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice choked. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a new life she would now face. A life of a cell, of guilt, and perhaps of a terror that no fortune could buy or ward off. The jungle's justice had acted, and now the justice of men would take its course, but the panther's shadow would remain, a dark reminder that not all power resides in human hands. The rumble of the patrol car's engine swallowed the last echo of the train's whistle, carrying the young heiress away from the tracks and into a nightmare of her own making. The image of the panther, with its emerald eyes and the wild strength that severed the ropes, did not abandon her. It was a ghost, a curse that refused to disappear. How to explain that her downfall was not the work of human error, but of a beast's intervention? It would be ridiculous, the definitive proof of her madness. But the beast was real, the pursuit, the humiliation, the terror. It was the wild justice that had reached her, and now the justice of men awaited. Her arrival at the police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and distant voices. The booking process, the removal of her belongings, the mugshot, each step was a blow to her identity, stripping her of her status, her fortune, her very essence. She was just another number, another face in a sea of criminals. The cold air of the cell, the smell of disinfectant and despair, the reality of metal bars, all crashed against her with the force of a high-speed train. There was no silk, no champagne, just a hard bed and a metal toilet. Silence, once a luxury, was now a torment, filled only by the echo of her own thoughts and the panther's imaginary roar. The tears that were once of anger now began to mix with a chilling fear. The terror she wanted to inflict on her mother now enveloped her. Far away, in a hospital room, the elderly mother began to emerge from the fog of sedatives and shock. The small dog, lying at her feet, whimpered softly as if sharing her pain. Her wrists and ankles, though clean and bandaged, still throbbed, a constant reminder of her own daughter's cruelty. But the physical pain was secondary to the wound in her soul, a wound that seemed destined never to heal. A nurse entered with a gentle smile, but her eyes carried the veiled curiosity of one who had heard an unbelievable story. "Ma'am, the detective would like to speak with you again. He's very interested in the details of the rescue." The word rescue was spoken with an almost imperceptible hesitation. The mother nodded, her voice still weak. "I know what I saw, and I will tell." The detective, the same man with tired but penetrating eyes, sat beside her bed. He didn't seem skeptical, just cautious. "Your daughter has been detained, ma'am. The evidence against her is strong, but we need your full testimony. About everything, including about the panther." The mother closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. How to convince someone of something so extraordinary? But the image of the beast, severing the ropes with its teeth, the wild strength in its eyes, the almost human intelligence, all of it was as real as her own heartbeat. It was a miracle, a divine intervention that defied all logic, and it was the truth that kept her alive. She saved me," the mother began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I was tied up, the train approaching, my daughter. She left me there to die. And then the panther appeared. It didn't attack me. It bit the ropes, it severed them, and then it chased my daughter." The detective took notes, without expressing judgment. He had seen strange things in his career, but a saving panther was something new. "And the dog? Was it there?" "Yes," the mother replied, stroking the small animal's head. "He was with me. He saw everything. He tried to protect me." She knew no one would believe the full story, but it was the truth, and that truth, however unbelievable, was what gave her a thread of hope amidst the desolation. She had not merely survived, she had been saved by a force that transcended human understanding, and that force demanded justice. In the cold cell, the young heiress cowered, her body trembling. Luxury, power, impunity, all slipped away like sand through her fingers. The city lights, once a symbol of her dominion, now seemed mocking, distant. She tried to rationalize, to blame her mother, the dog, fate, even the impossible panther. But the image of sharp teeth severing the ropes, the beast's penetrating gaze, the relentless pursuit, all repeated in her mind, an endless torture. She was not the predator, she was the prey, and the panther, invisible yet ever-present, was her hunter. The jungle's justice had acted, and now the justice of men would take its course. But the panther's shadow would remain, a dark reminder that not all power resides in human hands. The world she had built on lies and privilege had crumbled, and now she was alone, confronted with the emptiness of her own cruelty and the terror of a beast she could never forget. Dawn was approaching, but for her, the night was just beginning. Dawn was approaching, but for the young heiress, the night was just beginning, stretching into an endless torment. The silence of the cell was a new kind of torture, a brutal contrast to the constant hum of her luxurious life. There was no soft music, no distant city drone filtered through the soundproof windows of her penthouse. Only the oppressive silence, occasionally punctuated by the metallic clang of a distant door or the indistinct murmur of voices she couldn't decipher. Her designer clothes, now crumpled and dirty, felt alien on her skin, a cruel reminder of a world falling apart. She longed for silk, for cashmere, for anything but that rough institutional fabric. Her mind, once so sharp at calculating market trends and social maneuvers, now incessantly replayed a single scene. The gleam in the panther's eyes, the powerful jaws, the tearing sound of the ropes. It wasn't just a memory, it was a presence. She felt the beast's gaze, cold and unwavering, even through the concrete walls. It was as if the creature had etched itself onto her psyche, a predator now haunting its failed huntress. She tried to sleep, but every shadow danced with the beast's form. Every creak was the whisper of its approach. The fear was raw, primal, stripping her of all layers of her cultivated composure. It wasn't the fear of losing money or status. It was the fear of being hunted, of being utterly powerless. She, who had always commanded, was now commanded by an invisible force, a force that had shattered her world and left her exposed. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She wanted to eliminate her mother to secure her inheritance, to solidify her control. Instead, she had lost everything. Her name, once synonymous with power and wealth, would now be dragged through the mud. The headlines would be brutal, her carefully constructed image pulverized. And for what? For a brief, terrifying encounter with a creature that defied logic, a creature that had chosen to save its victim. The thought of her mother alive, speaking, was a new wave of nausea. How could she have survived? And the panther, that impossible beast. It was a joke, a nightmare, a cruel twist of fate. She tried to construct a narrative, a defense, mental instability, a momentary lapse, but the cold, hard facts would speak louder than any fabricated excuse. The ropes, her fingerprints, the train schedule, the motive, clear as day. Her facade of invincibility had shattered, revealing a terrified and vulnerable woman beneath. The silence of the cell was no longer just quiet, it was deafening, amplifying the echoes of her own monstrous actions. The image of the panther, its eyes burning into her, was a constant, unwanted companion, a silent judge in her personal hell. It wasn't just the law she feared, it was the primal, untamed justice that had intervened, a justice that seemed to mock her human arrogance. She was no longer the huntress, she was the hunted, trapped, cornered, awaiting the inevitable. The night stretched endlessly, a dark canvas for her growing terror. Far away, in the aseptic hospital environment, the elderly mother began to rise again, not just physically, but with a new strength of purpose. The detective, a man whose face betrayed years of witnessing human depravity, listened intently, his pen now motionless over his notepad. He was weighing her words, separating the plausible from the miraculous. "Ma'am, the story of the panther. It's extraordinary. There are no records of a wild animal acting this way in the region. There are no paw prints, no fur, nothing to prove its presence, other than your account." The mother looked at him, her eyes tired but firm. "And the severed ropes? Where is the explanation for that? The train didn't cut them. They were bitten. I saw, I felt. And my dog, he was there. He doesn't lie." The small animal, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, let out a soft, short bark nestled in her lap. "He is my silent witness," she said, stroking him. "He protected me as best he could, and then the panther did the rest." The pain in her chest was not just physical, it was the pain of a betrayed mother, but also the pain of a soul that had witnessed something that defied reason. She knew that disbelief would be the first barrier, but her conviction was unshakable. "I know it's hard to believe, but the truth, detective, is not always convenient. My daughter tried to kill me, and a beast saved me. It's the only truth I have." The detective sighed, rubbing his temple. "Ma'am, your testimony is crucial. The part about your daughter is solid. The part about the panther, we'll have to present that with caution. But we won't ignore it. There's something very strange happening here, and I've seen enough to know that not everything has an immediate logical explanation." He stood up, Rest. We'll have more questions tomorrow, and if possible, we'll try to find some evidence, however small, of that animal's presence." The mother nodded, exhausted. She knew the legal battle would be long and painful. But she also knew she wasn't alone. The panther's shadow, the jungle's strength was with her, a reminder that life, even on the brink of death, could find unlikely defenders. The justice of men was slow and imperfect, but the jungle's justice had been swift and relentless. And now she hoped both would meet. In his police station office, Detective Ramirez studied the crime scene photos. The ropes, irregularly cut, with marks that appeared to be teeth impressions, were the most intriguing point. He had sent the samples for forensic analysis, but the idea of such a large, wild animal acting that way was almost laughable. Nevertheless, the elderly woman's conviction was palpable, and Ramirez trusted his instinct. There was something more. He opened a map of the region, looking for forest parks, reserves, anything that could harbor a panther. The area was predominantly urban, with some remaining patches of Atlantic forest. It was improbable, but not impossible. He made some calls, consulting biologists and forest rangers about unusual sightings. The answers were always the same. "Not around here, detective. Maybe a jungle cat, but a panther." Impossible. But Ramirez was not giving up. He had seen the impossible before. He knew that truth often hid in the strangest details, in the most improbable accounts. The panther's story, however fantastic, was the only piece that didn't fit the puzzle, and therefore it was the most important. He needed an explanation, not just for the court, but for himself. The image of the panther's eyes, described by the mother, haunted his thoughts. It was the image of a primal force, an intervention that defied the natural order of things, and he, a man of law and logic, was being forced to confront the inexplicable. The attempted murder investigation was straightforward, but the panther's shadow added a layer of mystery that compelled him to go beyond the obvious. He knew that somehow the truth about the beast was linked to the truth about the daughter, and he would find it. In his police station office, Detective Ramirez felt the weight of the hours and growing frustration. Calls to biologists and forest rangers had been unanimous. A black panther in an area so close to civilization was an unprecedented anomaly. "Impossible, Detective. There's no habitat for such an animal here. It must be a misidentification." The professional voices were skeptical, but the conviction in the elderly mother's eyes and the marks on the ropes told a different story. He spread the crime scene photos on the table, his eyes fixed on the frayed fibers, on the irregular ends that seemed to have been torn by a brutal force, not cut by a blade or broken by impact. The preliminary forensic report on the ropes had arrived. It confirmed that the ruptures were consistent with bite trauma, but DNA analysis, if any residue was present, would take days. "Bite from what, exactly?" he muttered to himself, the echo of the question hanging in the cold air of the room. The absence of fur, clear paw prints, or any biological trace at the scene was what most intrigued him. How could such a large creature have acted with such precision and disappeared without a trace? It was as if the panther were a shadow, a legend that had materialized only to fulfill its purpose and then dissolve into thin air. Ramirez decided to revisit the site, not in search of new, obvious evidence, but for a feeling, a detail that the haste of the initial investigation might have overlooked. The late afternoon light bathed the tracks, transforming the metal into golden veins stretching to the horizon. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the low vegetation, the stones, every inch of that stretch of land. There was nothing, just the heavy silence of nature that seemed to have swallowed any trace of the drama that had unfolded there. But then, almost imperceptibly, under a clump of dry grass, he noticed something, a small, dark stain, almost a scratch in the earth that didn't look natural. He knelt, examining it closely. It was a mark, deep as if something heavy and pointed had dragged there, but left no clear footprint. It could have been anything, a branch, a stone. But Ramirez felt a shiver. It was different. It was the only imperfection in a scene of frightening perfection. Meanwhile, in her cell, the young heiress was on the verge of collapse. Dawn had brought not hope, but an intensification of her torment. Every shadow on the wall seemed to lengthen and twist, transforming into the panther's slender, muscular silhouette. The beast's eyes, once just a memory, were now a constant presence, burning in her mind, searing through her closed eyelids. She tried to scream, but her throat was dry, her voice caught in a knot of terror. The reality of her situation was a slow poison, corroding every fiber of her arrogance. When the cell door opened and 2 officers led her to the interrogation room, she could barely move. Her steps were dragged, her body trembling uncontrollably. The room was cold, illuminated by a white, merciless light that seemed to expose every one of her fears. Detective Ramirez was there, his eyes tired but penetrating. Beside him, a prosecutor with a severe expression. "Miss Celeste, let's begin," said the prosecutor, her voice calm and professional, but with a tone that brooked no evasions. "Your mother, Eleonora, has given a detailed statement. She accuses you of attempted murder." Celeste laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "My mother is crazy. She always has been. She's senile. It's a setup. She wanted to frame me to get the inheritance." Ramirez placed the photos of the ropes on the table. "These are the ropes that tied your mother to the tracks. We found your fingerprints on them, and the preliminary forensic report indicates they were severed by bite trauma." Celeste looked at the photos, and the image of the panther's sharp teeth tearing the fibers invaded her mind. She shuddered, her eyes wide. "No, it wasn't. It was a small animal, a dog, yes, a wild dog." Her voice was a desperate whisper. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "A dog capable of severing ropes that thick? And why does your mother describe a black panther, a creature that saved her?" Upon hearing the word panther, Celeste let out a muffled scream. Her eyes swept the room, as if the beast were hidden in some corner. "No, there's no panther. It's a lie. It's her imagination. She made it all up. She's trying to scare me." Her voice rose in pitch, bordering on hysteria. Ramirez watched her intently. The denial was obvious, but the terror in her eyes was real. "Miss Celeste, your mother described the panther in vivid detail. Its eyes, its coat, its strength. She said the panther chased you until you tripped on the tracks and were apprehended. Lies, she lied. The panther, the panther, it chased me. It wanted to get me. It's real." "No, it's not. It's a nightmare." Celeste writhed in her chair, arms crossed over her chest, as if trying to protect herself from an invisible attack. Her facade of invincibility had shattered, revealing a terrified and vulnerable woman. She could no longer maintain the lie, not when the image of the beast was so vivid in her mind. The prosecutor exchanged a look with Ramirez. Celeste's hysteria, the way she alternated between denial and terror, was more revealing than any confession. The fear of the panther was palpable, stronger than the fear of the law. "Miss Celeste, we need you to tell us what really happened," Ramirez said, his voice softer, trying to penetrate the barrier of her panic. "Your mother is alive. She is recovering in the hospital. She is not senile." "She's telling the truth." "No. She can't be alive. The panther, it shouldn't have appeared." Celeste shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted what was mine. She never gave me anything. She always controlled me." Anger mixed with fear, a toxic blend of emotions. The interrogation continued for hours, but Celeste was on the verge of collapse. Her mind, once so sharp and calculating, was now fragmented by the terror of the panther. She could no longer construct a coherent narrative. The beast had destroyed not only her plan, but also her sanity. She was the hunted, trapped, cornered, awaiting the inevitable, not only from human justice, but from the primal, untamed justice that had intervened. At the hospital, Eleonora, with her small dog nestled in her lap, received a visit from a social worker. She recounted her story with the same calm and conviction. "My daughter tried to kill me, and a panther saved me. I know it seems impossible, but it's the truth." The social worker, though visibly shocked, wrote down every word. Eleonora's piece was a stark contrast to the torment Celeste faced. She knew that the justice of men was slow and imperfect, but the justice of the jungle had been swift and relentless. And now she hoped both would meet, and that the truth, however strange, would prevail. The air in the interrogation room felt denser, suffocating, laden with the metallic scent of fear. Celeste was no longer the haughty, calculating woman. She was a shell, a trembling body, her eyes fixed on an invisible spot in the corner of the room, where only she saw the shadow lurking. The prosecutor and Ramirez watched, and with each hysterical word from Celeste, each denial followed by a scream of terror, the truth became clearer, more grotesque. "She's hunting me. I know she is. She won't stop until she gets me." Celeste shook her head, her hands clutching her own hair, as if trying to tear the panther's image from her mind. Her eyes. They saw me. They knew. She knew what I was going to do. Her voice was a wail, a broken whisper that barely made it through her dry throat. Ramirez exchanged a look with the prosecutor. The confession was not verbal, but it was there, in every tremor, every tear. The fear of the beast was the key, the crack in the armor that the law alone could not penetrate. "Miss Celeste," he tried again, his voice calm, "no one is hunting you here. You are safe. But we need you to tell us what happened. Your mother deserves justice." The mention of justice made Celeste laugh again, a shrill, joyless sound. Justice. She always had everything. I never had anything. I just wanted what was mine by right. She robbed me. She imprisoned me. The anger, once mixed with fear, now erupted like a volcano, distorting her face. And that thing, that beast, it shouldn't have appeared. It ruined everything. It should have let the train pass. The prosecutor took notes. Each word a brick in the construction of the case, the implicit admission, the clear motive, the latent anger. The panther element, however bizarre, now served as a catalyst for the truth, a psychological torture that forced her to confront her actions. Meanwhile, in the forensic lab, Ramirez's team was perplexed. The preliminary report on the ropes had arrived. "Detective," the head of forensics began, his voice laden with a mix of skepticism and fascination, "the bite trauma marks on the ropes. They don't fit any domestic canine or feline pattern we know. They are deep, with immense jaw pressure, and the tooth spacing. It's large, very large, and the shape. It's almost like the canines of a large predator." Ramirez felt a shiver down his spine. "A large predator? Like what?" The expert hesitated. "We don't have a database for that, detective. Not for something that fits perfectly. But there are microscopic residues, animal fibers, not human, and an infinitesimal amount of saliva. We're trying to extract DNA, but it's a challenge. It's very little." "And the soil sample?" Ramirez asked, his voice tense. "Ah, that's even stranger." The expert continued, picking up a microscope. "We found microparticles of a mineral that is extremely rare in this region, and traces of an organic substance we couldn't identify. It's not plant, it's not common animal. It's unique. And the mark itself, the depression. It's consistent with something heavy and pointed being dragged or driven in with force, but it's not a paw print." Ramirez looked at the evidence, his mind racing. The panther's story, Celeste's hysteria, the marks on the ropes, the mysterious earth. The puzzle was beginning to fit together in a way that defied all logic. Keep going. I want every detail, every fiber, every molecule, no matter how strange it seems. At the hospital, Eleonora received a visit from Ramirez. Her small dog, Pipoca, slept in her lap, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. The peace on her face was almost surreal, a stark contrast to the torment her daughter faced. "Did she confess, Detective?" Eleonora asked, her voice soft but firm. "She didn't confess in words, Eleonora," Ramirez replied, sitting beside the bed. "But her panic, the terror of the Panther, it's more revealing than any confession. She's on the verge of a breakdown, and the forensic evidence, it's starting to corroborate your story in a way I still can't fully explain." Eleonora smiled slightly. "I told you, Detective, truth is often stranger than fiction. And justice, it comes from unexpected places." She stroked Pipoca's head. "I feel sorry for her, you know, my daughter. But she made her choice, and now she has to live with the consequences. Not just those of the law, but those of that beast, the one that chased her, the one that saved me." Ramirez watched the woman, the unshakable conviction in her eyes. He knew he was dealing with something that transcended common criminality. There was a greater force at play, an intervention that defied human understanding. He had the evidence, he had the implicit confession, but the mystery of the Panther continued to be the central piece, the shadow that hung over the entire case. Back at the police station, Celeste was formally charged with aggravated attempted murder. Her lawyers, shocked by their client's mental state, tried to argue insanity, but the prosecution had a solid case. Celeste's hysteria about the Panther, though it seemed like madness to most, was the most compelling proof of her guilt and the terror that had led her to trip and be caught. In her cell, darkness was her only companion. But it was not an empty darkness. It was populated by the Panther's burning eyes, by the sensation of its warm breath on her neck, by the sound of its claws scraping the floor. She was trapped, not just by metal bars, but by the beast that had become her personal tormentor. The jungle's justice had been swift and relentless, and now the justice of men was about to join it, sealing her fate in a hell of her own making. The inevitable was no longer a distant threat. It was a palpable reality, a cold embrace that enveloped her, while the image of the Panther danced in her mind, an eternal reminder of her arrogance and her downfall. In the cold, damp cell, Celeste found no refuge. Shadows danced on the walls, and in every movement she saw the Panther's flaming eyes. The smell of mold and despair was suffocating, but the imaginary scent of the beast, its warm breath on her neck, was even more real. She cowered in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, rocking back and forth, a silent mantra of denial and terror bubbling on her cracked lips. "It's not real. It's not real. It's a nightmare." But the image was etched into her mind, sharper than any happy memory from her childhood. The Panther was not just a memory, it was a constant presence, an invisible tormentor that watched her, patient, waiting. Her lawyers, two well-dressed and expensive men, visited her. The cell door creaked open, and the faint light from the corridor invaded the small space, but Celeste barely registered their presence. Her eyes were fixed on a spot in the darkness where the beast lurked. "Miss Celeste," one of them began, his voice polished, "we need to discuss your defense. We're building a case of temporary insanity. Your mother, Eleonora, is testifying about the Panther, which gives us an opening." Celeste let out a shrill laugh, which turned into a sob. "Insanity! She's crazy! The Panther is real! It chased me! It wanted to get me! It's here! I feel it! It won't leave me alone!" Her lawyers exchanged worried glances. The client they knew, the astute and controlling woman, had disappeared, replaced by a fragile and terrified figure. The irony was cruel. The Panther's story, which they hoped to use to justify a mental breakdown, was the very cause of her breakdown. "Miss Celeste, we need you to calm down," the other lawyer tried, his voice firmer. "If you continue like this, the prosecution will use it against you. They'll say you're faking, or that your madness is a manifestation of guilt." "Guilt?" Celeste screamed, her voice hoarse. "I'm not guilty. She should have died. She robbed me. The Panther. The Panther is to blame. It shouldn't have appeared." She stood up abruptly, her eyes wide, pointing to the empty corner of the cell. "It's there. It's looking at me. It knows. It knows I won't be able to escape." The lawyers recoiled, their defense strategy crumbling before their eyes. How could they argue insanity if their client's own madness was a veiled confession of the bizarre story the prosecution was beginning to take seriously? The Panther's terror was so visceral that it transcended any attempt at legal rationalization. It was living proof of what Eleonora had suffered and what Celeste had done. In the prosecutor's office, the prosecutor and Ramirez reviewed the case. "She's disintegrating, Detective," the prosecutor stated, a grim smile on her lips. "The Panther story, which seemed the weakest part of the case, is becoming the strongest. Her insanity defense will be our proof of guilt. She's not faking. She's genuinely terrified by the creature that intervened in her crime." Ramirez nodded, his mind still struggling to process the totality of events. "It's a precedent, a case where the intervention of nature, or something resembling it, is a central piece of the accusation. Justice indeed came from unexpected places." He picked up one of the photos of the severed ropes. "The teeth marks are unmistakable, and the expert confirmed that the force required to sever those ropes in that manner would be immense. It's not a common animal, it's Eleonora's panther." The prosecutor smiled. "And Celeste's hysteria is proof that she's not making it up. She's living her own private hell, a hell created by the creature that prevented her from committing a heinous crime. We'll use her own madness as proof of guilt. It's not a simulation. It's the manifestation of the terror of a guilty conscience." Meanwhile, Eleonora was at home, in her favorite armchair, with Pipoca nestled in her lap. The peace on her face was a testament to her recovery and her unshakable faith. She read a book, but her mind was far away, reflecting on her daughter's fate. She felt no joy in Celeste's misfortune, only a deep sadness and the acceptance that everyone reaps what they sow. The Panther had been an instrument, a catalyst for a justice she never imagined. It had saved her life, yes, but it had also exposed the darkness in her daughter's heart. "Truth always finds a way, my little one," she whispered to Pipoca, stroking his ears. "Sometimes it's a wild and unexpected path, but it's the path of truth." The trial date was set. The media was already in a frenzy, with sensational headlines about the Justice Panther and the demonic daughter. The Panther's story, once dismissed as delusion, was now the center of attention. A bizarre tale that defied logic, but which Celeste's evidence and behavior made undeniable. The courtroom was about to become a stage for one of the strangest stories ever told. Back in her cell, Celeste was huddled on the floor, her eyes wide, fixed on an invisible spot. She no longer spoke, only murmured incoherent words. In her mind, the Panther was there, not attacking her, but simply present, a silent sentinel, its golden eyes watching every movement, every breath. She could feel the beast's weight on her chest, not crushing her, but reminding her of its constant presence, its eternal vigilance. The Panther needed no claws or teeth to torture her. Its mere existence was the punishment. She had escaped the train, but not the beast. The jungle's justice had been relentless, and now the justice of men was about to seal her fate. But Celeste's true hell had already begun. A personal hell where the Panther would be her eternal shadow, her eternal tormentor, a constant reminder of what she had tried to do and what had stopped her. Freedom was an illusion. She was trapped, not by bars, but by the beast that inhabited her mind, a living testament to the intervention that changed everything. The city air had never felt so charged, not with the usual pollution, but with the electricity of feverish anticipation. Celeste's trial date had arrived, and with it, an unprecedented media storm. Newspapers, televisions, radios, all echoed the same bizarre story. The same question: could justice possibly come in the form of a wild beast? The courtroom was not just a legal forum. It was a circus, a stage for the unimaginable. Outside, a crowd gathered, cameras flashing, microphones extended. Reporters spoke in dramatic tones about the Justice Panther and the monster daughter. The story, once ridiculed as delusion, was now the headline, a tale that defied reason, but which Celeste's evidence and behavior made undeniable. The truth, however fantastic, had asserted itself. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was equally dense. Every seat was occupied. Lawyers whispered, the judge adjusted his glasses, and the jurors, chosen after an exhaustive process to find minds open enough to consider the extraordinary, seemed a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Then she entered, Celeste. Her steps were dragged, her body shrunken. Her hair, once impeccable, was disheveled, and her eyes, once filled with an arrogant gleam, were now pools of terror and exhaustion. She wore a drab grey suit, an attempt at normalcy that failed miserably in the face of her cadaverous pallor and the uncontrollable tremors that shook her. She looked at no one, her eyes fixed on an invisible point before her, or perhaps on something only she could see. As she was guided to the defense table, Celeste stumbled, almost falling. Her lawyers steadied her, their faces a mix of concern and resignation. The insanity strategy, which once seemed promising, was now a double-edged sword. Their client was the very proof of the accusation. Shortly after, Eleonora entered. Her entrance was discreet, but her presence was magnetic. She walked with serene dignity, her white hair framing a face marked by life, but now radiating an unshakable peace. Pipoca, the small dog, was not with her, but his image was etched in everyone's minds. She sat in the front row, beside Detective Ramirez, who watched her with silent respect. Her eyes met Celeste's for a brief instant. There was no hatred, no anger, only a deep sadness and a silent lament for the path her daughter had chosen. The judge struck his gavel, and the trial began. The prosecutor, a woman with a severe countenance and powerful voice, rose for her opening statement. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice resonating through the room, "this is no ordinary case. It is not a case of simple greed or premeditated violence. It is a case that challenges our understanding of justice, a case where nature itself, or something beyond it, intervened to prevent a heinous crime." Celeste trembled, her eyes wide. She began to murmur, a hoarse, almost inaudible voice. One of her lawyers tried to calm her, but she ignored him, her attention completely absorbed by the prosecutor's words. "The accused, Celeste Vancroft," the prosecutor continued, pointing at Celeste, who flinched, "attempted to murder her own mother, Eleonora Vancroft, by tying her to high-speed train tracks, an act of unimaginable cruelty, motivated by pure avarice." The prosecutor paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle. "But what happened next?" she said, lowering her voice to an almost conspiratorial tone, yet laden with conviction. "Defies all logic. A panther, a majestic and wild creature, appeared out of nowhere, not to attack, but to save. It severed the ropes binding Mrs. Vancroft, freeing her from certain death, and then it pursued the accused, Celeste, until she tripped and was apprehended by the guards." A murmur ran through the room. The jurors exchanged glances, some with disbelief, others with a disturbing fascination. "The forensic evidence," the prosecutor continued, holding up a folder, "is irrefutable. Teeth marks on the ropes, unidentified animal DNA, microparticles of rare soil, all point to the intervention of a large creature. And Mrs. Eleonora Vancroft's testimony is consistent, calm, and unshakable. She then turned her attention to Celeste. The defense will attempt to argue insanity. But I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the accused's madness is not a defense. It is a confession. It is the manifestation of the terror of a guilty conscience, haunted by the creature that prevented her from committing her crime. The panther which saved Eleonora became the tormentor of Celeste's mind. She is not faking. She is living her own private hell, a hell created by the beast that justice sent. Celeste let out a sharp scream, pointing to an empty spot in the room. "She's here! She's looking at me! She knows! She knows I won't escape!" Her lawyers rushed to restrain her, whispering urgently in her ear. But it was too late. The damage was done. The prosecutor smiled coldly, a glint of triumph in her eyes. Celeste's hysteria was the most powerful proof of all. The panther did not need to be physically present to testify. Its shadow had already condemned Celeste long before the trial began. The courtroom was about to delve into the strange and wild truth that had unfolded on the tracks. The judge's gavel echoed through the room, a dry sound that tried in vain to restore order after Celeste's shrill scream. "Order! Order in this court!" His voice was firm, but the room was already in an uproar. The jurors exchanged glances, some with wide eyes of shock, others with an expression of horror. The prosecutor, with an almost imperceptible smile, watched the scene, knowing that Celeste had just handed her the most compelling evidence. Celeste's defense lawyers struggled to calm her, one holding her arm, the other whispering urgent words. But Celeste was beyond reason, her eyes fixed on the empty spot where she claimed to see the panther. Her tremors intensified and she began to cry, a hoarse, desperate wail that cut through the air. "She's here! I see her! She won't leave me alone!" The judge, after a few moments, managed to restore a fragile calm. "Madam Prosecutor, proceed, and defense, please restrain your client." The prosecutor nodded, her voice now graver, more laden with conviction. "As I was saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the accused's madness is not a defense. It is the manifestation of a guilty conscience, haunted by the creature that prevented her from committing her crime. The panther which saved Eleonora became the tormentor of Celeste's mind. She is not faking. She is living her own private hell, a hell created by the beast that justice sent." The room remained silent, the weight of the prosecutor's words hanging in the air. It was an audacious argument, almost mystical, but the scene that had just unfolded before everyone made it terrifyingly credible. The first to be called to the witness stand was Detective Ramirez. His voice was calm and professional, describing the crime scene, the severed ropes, the pursuit, and Celeste's capture. He presented photographs of the ropes, enlarged to show the teeth marks. The marks were consistent with a large animal of exceptional strength, he explained, pointing to the images on a screen. The rupture pattern indicated a tensile and cutting force that could not be produced by a human. Celeste, who had been cowering in her chair, abruptly raised her head at the sight of the photos. A moan escaped her lips. She closed her eyes tightly, as if trying to erase the panther's image from her mind. Next, the prosecutor called Eleonora Vancroft. The room fell silent as the elderly woman walked with firm but slow steps towards the witness stand. Her white hair gleamed under the courtroom lights, and her eyes, though laden with deep sadness as she passed Celeste, radiated a serenity that contrasted sharply with her daughter's agitation. Eleonora took the oath with a clear and firm voice. The prosecutor began with basic questions, establishing the mother-daughter relationship and the events leading up to the fateful day. Eleonora described the argument over the inheritance, Celeste's anger, the feeling of betrayal. Her voice held no anger, only a resigned melancholy. "And then, Mrs. Vancroft," the prosecutor asked, her voice soft, "what happened when you were taken to the tracks?" Eleonora took a deep breath. "Celeste tied me up with thick ropes. I begged, but she didn't listen. I could feel the train's vibration approaching, the sound, the smell of metal and smoke. I knew it was the end." A solitary tear trickled down her face, but her voice didn't falter. "Then, suddenly, I felt a tug, an incredible force, and a smell. Wild. I opened my eyes." She paused, and everyone in the room held their breath. Celeste was motionless, her eyes fixed on her mother, a mix of terror and fascination on her pale face. "I saw the panther," Eleonora continued, her voice now a whisper, but one that reverberated through the entire courtroom. "Its eyes. They were golden. They were ancient. It was unlike any animal I had ever seen. It was biting the ropes with a fury, but a controlled fury. It severed them, and then it pushed me off the tracks. I fell, and it turned and went after Celeste." The prosecutor nodded. "Do you have any doubt about what you saw, Mrs. Vancroft?" "None," Eleonora replied, her voice regaining its firmness. "It was real as the air we breathe. It saved me, and I believe it came to deliver justice." Celeste's defense lawyer tried to discredit Eleonora during cross-examination. "Mrs. Vancroft, with all due respect, don't you think the trauma of the situation, the proximity of death, might have led to a hallucination? A way for your brain to create a savior in a moment of extreme despair?" Eleonora looked directly at the lawyer, her eyes conveying an ancient wisdom. "I was about to die, yes, but what I saw was not an illusion. I felt its breath, the warmth of its body. I saw the strength in its muscles, and the marks on the ropes, the DNA. They are not illusions. The panther was real, and it is everywhere now." Eleonora cast a significant glance at Celeste, who shuddered, as if the beast's shadow had just passed over her. The prosecutor then called the forensic expert, a meticulous man who presented a detailed analysis of the ropes. "The teeth marks are consistent with a large feline, with an estimated bite force of hundreds of pounds per square inch. The animal DNA found in the rope fibers is unique, not matching any species catalogued in our databases, which suggests a wild and perhaps rare origin." He showed graphs and microscopic images, transforming the fantastic story into irrefutable scientific data. Every word from the expert was a nail in the coffin of Celeste's sanity. She began to sway back and forth, muttering to herself. The panther, invisible to all but her, was becoming more and more real, more and more present in her tortured mind. The justice of men, with its evidence and testimonies, was merely formalizing the verdict the beast had already delivered in her heart. The courtroom now was not just a stage for legal drama, but a mirror for Celeste's personal hell, where the panther was the only audience. The courtroom seemed to shrink around Celeste. The forensic expert's words, cold and scientific, were like hammer blows to her already fragile mind. Every detail about the bite force, the unique DNA, the microparticles of rare soil, were not just evidence, they were echoes of the beast, whispers of its inescapable presence. Celeste swayed, her eyes glazed, sweat trickling down her pale face. For her, the panther was no longer a distant memory or a shadow. It was a living entity, materializing in the dark corners of the room, lurking behind the jurors, its golden eyes fixed on her. The defense lawyer, an experienced and skeptical man, attempted one last, desperate move. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice laden with false compassion. "What we are witnessing here is not the confession of a crime, but the collapse of a mind. Mrs. Vancroft is clearly in a state of profound mental disturbance. The trauma of being accused of such a heinous act, coupled with the pressure of this trial, has led her to a delusion. The Panther's story, however fascinating, is a fantasy, a hallucination created by a mind desperately seeking an escape from reality. But as he spoke, Celeste let out a shrill scream, pointing into the void. She's laughing at me. Don't you see her? She's right there with her sharp teeth waiting. Her lawyers tried to restrain her, but she struggled, her eyes wild. The judge struck his gavel repeatedly, but the scene had already been etched into everyone's minds. The prosecutor watched, a subtle smile of triumph on her lips. The defense had, unwittingly, provided the most compelling evidence of all. The Panther did not need to be real to condemn Celeste. Its presence in her mind was enough. It was time for closing arguments. The prosecutor rose, her voice resonating with authority and conviction. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense attempts to convince us that Celeste Vancroft is a victim of her own madness. But I tell you, her madness is not a defense. It is the punishment itself. It is the hell she created for herself. She is not faking. She is living the terror of a guilty conscience, haunted by the creature that prevented her from committing her crime. The Panther, which saved Eleonora, became the tormentor of Celeste's mind. Justice sometimes takes unexpected forms. Sometimes it comes with claws and teeth, with golden eyes and a silent roar that echoes in the souls of the guilty. She paused, dramatically, sweeping her gaze across all the jurors. The Panther is not an illusion. It is the manifestation of a universal truth, that evil cannot prosper unpunished. It is the symbol of divine intervention, or of nature itself, refusing to allow greed and cruelty to prevail. The evidence is clear. The marks on the ropes, the DNA, the unshakable testimony of Eleonora Vancroft, and yes, even the accused's hysteria, all point to the same conclusion. Celeste Vancroft attempted to murder her own mother for money, and she was thwarted by a force that transcends our understanding. Now it is up to you, ladies and gentlemen, to formalize that justice. The defense lawyer tried to argue about the presumption of innocence, reasonable doubt, the fragility of the human mind under stress. But his words seemed hollow, without force, against the prosecutor's powerful and almost mystical narrative, and against the very image of Celeste, who now cowered in her chair, whispering to herself, her eyes fixed on an invisible spot. The judge, with solemn seriousness, instructed the jury. The room was in tense silence as the 12 men and women retired to deliberate. Time seemed to drag, each minute an eternity. Celeste trembled uncontrollably, her murmurs turning into muffled laments. She felt the Panther's breath on her neck, the warmth of its invisible body, the promise of an eternal pursuit. When the jury returned, their faces were grave but determined. The verdict was read, and the word guilty echoed through the room, a dry, final sound that sealed Celeste's fate. In that instant, Celeste Vancroft did not scream. She did not cry. She simply collapsed. Her eyes widened, fixed on something only she could see. A distorted, terrified smile spread across her lips as she pointed to the door, to the windows, to the faces of the jurors. "She's everywhere," she shrieked, her voice now a mere hoarse whisper. "She'll never leave me. I see her. She's coming for me." The guards approached to take her away. Celeste did not resist physically, but her mind was already elsewhere, trapped in an endless nightmare. As she was dragged out of the courtroom, her eyes still searched for the Panther, the hunter of her soul. The justice of men had delivered its sentence, but the beast, the true tormentor, had already condemned Celeste to a much deeper prison, one where the bars were made of guilt, and the guardian was a golden-eyed panther, eternally lurking. Eleonora Vancroft, sitting in the front row, watched the scene with serene sadness. A tear trickled down her aged face, not from anger, but from pity for the daughter lost to darkness. She knew that the panther, the wild spirit of justice, had fulfilled its promise. Celeste would be punished, not only by the law, but by the very nature she had defied. And Eleonora, the mother who had been saved, would live the rest of her days with the memory of the majestic beast that intervened, a reminder that sometimes truth and justice come from where we least expect them, and that nature, in its ancient wisdom, always finds a way to balance the scales. The mystery of the panther became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale of greed and cruelty, and a testament to life's indomitable power. End.